What's up? Jeff from RetroArcadeGaming.com, back with my annual fall head cold, as well as another edition of Port Battles. In this series, we look at a classic arcade game and see how well or poorly it's been ported to various home console and computer systems over the years. Up this week, the first arcade game to receive an officially licensed home console port, and one of the greatest video games ever, Space Invaders. Space Invaders was released in June of 1978 by Taito, or Taito, depending on your preference, in Japan, and licensed to Midway for a July 1978 release in the United States. Not going to talk about the premise of the game. We've got lots to look at, including 45 ports, homebrews, and clones. One of my favorite aspects of Space Invaders is the simple 4-note background sound that slowly speeds up as you kill invaders. To me, the game just doesn't play or sound right with that element missing, so that's one of the things we're going to look at here as we walk through these ports, is how do they replicate that iconic background sound. Up first, the US upright version of Space Invaders via MAME. The Japanese version had a slightly different cabinet design and featured a slightly different backdrop than the one you see here. The Bally Astrocade got a clone entitled Astro Battle, also known as Astro Battle 2009, in 1978. It was developed in-house by Bally. The sounds aren't great on this one, but for the system it's running on, it plays fairly well. Remember, this was released in 78, so we got to cut it a little bit of slack. As we walk through the computer platforms specifically, there are a ton of clones available for most of the systems. One of the earliest, and probably one of my favorites, is for the Apple II, entitled Apple Invader, also known as Super Invader or Super Invasion. This was released by Creative Computing Software in 1979. Graphically, it looks awesome, and it's a pretty good clone of the original black and white arcade version. Doesn't sound great. The only downside, if you're emulating like me and have configured a joystick, there is no stop point at the center on the joystick. Your ship will constantly want to move left or right. It's a minor annoyance, probably best avoided by playing with the keyboard controller. Apple Invaders was later ported to the Atari 800, if that gives you any indication of how highly this clone was regarded. The Atari 2600 release of Space Invaders was published by Sears in 1980 and was the first officially licensed home console port of an arcade game. It's said to have quadrupled the sales of the Atari 2600. It's a solid release, features only 36 invaders on the screen. It's the reason I wanted an Atari 2600 back in the day, and it's a game that's still in my collection to this day. The Atari 8-bit port, released by Atari themselves in 1980, bit of a disappointment in my book. There's no bases to hide behind, which really alters the gameplay quite a bit. The sounds are disappointing as well. Maybe there's a reason Apple Invaders was ported to the 8-bit after all. The Texas Instruments TI-99 4A got the clone TI Invaders, released by Texas Instruments themselves in 1981. Much like the 2600 port was the killer app for that system, this was, without a doubt, the killer app for the TI-99 4A, at least for a while. It's got some sound effects that aren't quite to my liking, but the game looks and plays pretty well. It's a nice little clone for the TI-99 4A. Vic Avengers was a clone for the VIC-20, released by Commodore in 1981. The Commodore 64 also got a port, which obviously looked better than this, and we'll take a look at it a bit later. Given the platform, this is a pretty solid release. Intellivision owners didn't get an official arcade port, but instead got the clone Space Armada, released by Mattel themselves in 1981. This one's not among my favorites. I just don't think it plays that great. Everything is just too big on the screen for my liking. Having said that, if you had an Intellivision back in the day, probably on your must-have list of games. Color Space Invaders was a clone for the TRS-80 color computer, released by Spectral Associates in 1982. Pretty good play on the Coco. The sounds aren't great, but that's the case with most of these early PC releases. We're going to take a look at another Coco release a bit later on. It's actually pretty impressive in my book. I think it'll actually be the last one we look at today. A new system for us here, the Dragon 3264. Pretty similar to the TRS-80, but a bit different, if that makes any sense. Space Invaders was released by Micros in 1982. This one isn't bad. It's not great. Holds its own against other computer releases from the same era. Like the other computer releases, there were a number of clones available for the ZX Spectrum. One of the better ones, in my opinion, is Invaders, released by Arctic Computing in 1982. Looks very good, actually sounds pretty decent. It's a nice play on the ZX Spectrum. just for comparison's sakes, here's another Spectrum clone entitled Space Raiders. It was released by Saturn Software in 1982. Not near as good as Invaders in my opinion, but it gives you a look at another take on Space Invaders for the platform. Lots of clones for the BBC Micro as well. We're going to take a look at two of them today. Up first, Space Invaders, released by Superior Software in 1982. Plays okay, not great graphically, nor in the sound department. That's pretty much sums up most Superior titles, in my opinion. BBC Micro also got a release in 1982 from Byte. I'm not sure this one looks or sounds any better than the Superior release, just showing it as it's one of the many options available for the platform. The Atari 5200 port, released by Atari in '82, looks pretty similar to the 8-bit port, but does thankfully reintroduce the bases at the bottom of the screen and does away with the giant green pencil-looking thing with legs on the left side of the screen. I have no idea what the hell that was all about in the 8-bit port. It's not a bad port, just not among my favorites. Like most of the other computer systems, a plethora of Space Invader clones for the Commodore 64. Some good, many bad. One of my favorites is the clone Avenger from Commodore themselves in '83. And we looked at earlier the VIC-20 version. It looks very much like you'd expect Space Invaders to look, with the sounds that many of these are just a bit off, but it really doesn't detract from the gameplay too much. It's a nice solid port for the Commodore 64. Taito published their own version for the MSX in 1985. This one's a very nice port. The classic 4-note background tone plays throughout. My only complaint with this one is the tinny sounding fire sound, but otherwise it plays just fine. The firing sound just sounds kind of wimpy to me. The NES, to my knowledge, did not get a release in the USA, but the Japanese-based Famicom got a port in 1985 from Taito. The sound effects are a bit lacking on this, but overall it plays pretty well. The Sega SG-1000 port, released by Sega in '85, looks and sounds decent. Actually, when you compare it to other releases from the same time period, it ends up being one of the better ports, in my opinion. Not only for the SG-1000, but for all the systems released in that time frame. The Sharp X68000 port was released by Tiny Tomo in 1989. It attempts to replicate the black and white with the cellophane look It's not great look in my opinion, but the gameplay is pretty much like you'd expect Space Invaders to play. Sounds are a bit off, not a bad effort, however, for the Sharp X-68,000. Taito themselves released a port for the TurboGrafx-16 in 1990. Available in Japan only, looks very similar to a few of the other ports we've looked at graphically. The sounds are a departure from the actual arcade game, but it plays pretty well. The next couple are actually ports of the Super Space Invaders 91. The first is the Amstrad Color PC, which was released by Domark in 1991. It's a pretty poor effort lacking detail. The sounds aren't great either. Domark released the same Super Space Invaders 91 for the Sega Master System in 91. Looks much better on this platform than on the Amstrad. Plays very similar, but introduces background elements and bonus items awarded from the UFO. At least in this version, unlike in the Amstrad version, you can actually tell what the hell you're shooting at. Space Invaders 91 for the Sega Genesis Mega Drive is as close as you're going to get to Space Invaders on that system. Like the two we just looked at, it's more of a port of Space Invaders 91, although it doesn't quite get that right either. It was released by Taito in 91. If you want to play Space Invaders on your Genesis or Mega Drive, this is what you got. Space Invaders by Sinistar Developments was a shareware port released for the Atari ST in 1993. Decent sounds, plays pretty good. Sure, there were a number of ST clones and homebrews that are just as good, if not better, but this was my choice for today. Nintendo published a port for the Game Boy in 1994. Firing sound on this one is pretty cool. Like it. And the 4-note background drop, while not arcade accurate, isn't too bad either. This is actually a nice port for the Game Boy. We're going to look at a little better way of playing this cartridge here in just a second. So up next, we're going to discuss more of the platform than we are the port. The Super Game Boy was an adapter for your Nintendo Game Boy games that allowed them to be played in a Super NES. It's a actually pretty badass setup. Not only did it allow you to play the DS games, the Game Boy games, but in most cases, it enhanced the gameplay as well. Such is the case with Space Invaders, which, as we know, was released by Nintendo themselves. With the Super Game Boy adapter, your regular Game Boy game now has 2 modes of gameplay, including Super Game Boy mode and arcade mode. I can't get arcade mode to work, but I'm told it's a fairly accurate representation of the actual arcade game. We're going to look at Super Game Boy mode today, which takes the regular grayscale Game Boy game and adds 3 variants similar to Space Invaders DX. You got black and white with cellophane, and a full color version. Just for kicks, we're going to play the black and white with cellophane version, which sounds decent, doesn't look too bad either. A homebrew was made available as a freeware title for MS-DOS in 1995 by Paul Reed. This one looks decent, doesn't really have any sound to speak of, at least not that I could get to play. It's not a bad effort, not quite up to par with the Champ programming release, which we're going to take a look at here in just a little bit. The Virtual Boy got the Space Invaders Virtual Collection in '95, Japan only. Features challenge mode, virtual 3D mode, and original 2D mode. So we're going to look at 2D mode today, obviously, for obvious reasons. It sounds decent, plays decent. I'm not a big fan of the Virtual Boy, so I'll just leave it at that. Taito released a port in '95 for the TurboGrafx-CD that features classic mode with your choice of cabinet types, a la Space Invaders DX, as well as versus mode. It's very well done, a nice port for the TurboGrafx-CD. Next couple are DX, Space Invaders DX clones, basically, that allow you to select whether you want to play the original upright cabinet, the black and white version, the black and white with cellophane, whatever. The Sega Saturn port by Taito in 1996 was released in Japan only. When given the option, I'm always going to choose the upright cabinet with the backdrop. And this one actually looks and plays very well. The Super Nintendo port, Space Invaders, the original game, was released by Nintendo themselves in 1997. It offers single-player mode and a versus mode. Haven't really explored the versus mode too much. That would actually require a friend to play along with me. Single mode offers a number of visual options a la Space Invaders DX, upright cabinet, black and white with cellophane and color. Obviously, as I said, I'm always going to pick the upright cabinet with backdrop. Essentially, the game offers the game in its original release variants. It's spot on, very accurate representation of the arcade game, and very well done. Cham Programming always did a nice job with arcade clones for MS-DOS, and Space Invaders is no exception. Their game was entitled Champ Invaders, was released in 1997. It looks great with sounds, not to sound like a broken record, that are just a bit off. Otherwise, it's a very nicely done clone by Cham Programming, as usual. The Game Boy Color release by Activision in 1999 is more of a reimagining of Space Invaders, kind of like Space Invaders 91, kind of not, then it is a clone to the original arcade game. It's more colorful, has its own background music. Shooting the UFO will reward you with various power-ups. It's not a bad play, but strays a little bit too much from the arcade original if that's important to you. In a similar vein, the Nintendo 64 port is that same Activision 1999 reimagining. There's no shields. You can earn shields by shooting the UFO at the top. It rewards you with power-ups. There's a bit of a graphical glitch on my end where the shields don't display properly. But we're going to look at that in the next port, which is the PlayStation port, exact same game, and actually displays properly. There's also a version of this for the PC, but this is the N64 port by Activision in 1999. More of a reimagining of Space Invaders than actual Space Invaders itself. And here's that same port on the PlayStation 1. Only reason we're gonna take a look at this again is so you can see how the power-up shields are supposed to look without the glitching of the N64 variant that I have. The WonderSwan got a port by Sunsoft in 1999. It's well done, looks and sounds pretty good. Black and white only, but I guess we can't complain too much, as that's how the original Space Invaders release came out, black and white. So here's the WonderSwan port by Sunsoft. Game Boy Advance, released by Activision in 2002, has a couple of different game modes. We're going to stick looking at the classic mode of gameplay today. The firing sound is very good. Background sounds stray a bit from the arcade original. Plays like you'd expect Space Invaders port to play on the Game Boy Advance. Not too bad. Space Invaders Collection was a 2003 homebrew release from Opcode Software for the ColecoVision. I believe it also got an MSX release as well. It features a homebrew version of both Space Invaders and Space Invaders 2, also known as Space Invaders Deluxe. To me, it looks very similar to the original MSX version, which I guess isn't that surprising since ColecoVision and MSX run on very similar hardware. The sounds in this version are far superior, however, to that from the original MSX release. homebrew was released for the Vectrex in 2003 by Packrat Video Games. This game is entitled YASI, Y-A-S-I, which stands for Yet Another Space Invaders. Looks and sounds great. It's an impressive achievement on the Vectrex. Unfortunately, the presentation I've given you today doesn't really do it justice. It's a little bit dark and a little bit hard to make out what's going on, so I apologize for that. The Nintendo DS got a port via the title Space Invaders Revolution, which was published by Mastiff in 2005. There are two modes, Classic Mode and New Age Mode. Up first, let's take a look at Classic Mode, which features a pretty authentic take on the colorized version of the original arcade game. Next, New Age mode for that same Nintendo DS release, which at least at the start looks very similar to the classic mode with some spiffy new graphic. It also introduces power-ups, which can be used in combination and are more useful as the game progresses and becomes more difficult. We're just looking at this because why not? We haven't seen enough variants of Space Invaders yet, have we? Only got a few more to go here. We've talked a bit about the Taito Legends compilation on the PlayStation 2 when we covered Elevator Action and Jungle Hunt. Also included on that compilation, obviously, Space Invaders, as well as Space Invaders 2. This one looks great, plays great, and includes the original arcade game backdrop. Space Invaders Evolution was released for the PlayStation Portable in 2006. It features Classic Mode, Matchup Mode, and Future Mode. We're going to stick with the Classic Mode, which is a perfect rendition of the original black and white version of Space Invaders. The Wii got a arcade port of Space Invaders in Japan only in 2006 via the Wii Virtual Console. Looks and sounds arcade accurate, but features the colorized version of the game only. So this next one we're going to look at is a little bit interesting to me. There's several variants of this floating around, not only for this system, but for other systems as well. I found this version and the platform to be the most interesting. Essentially what's been done here is the original 8080 arcade source code has been converted to run on a number of platforms natively. In this instance, we're going to look at the converted 8080 source code on the Coco 3. This version was done by Glenn Hewlett. There's actually another one or two of these by different people floating around for the same platform. Best I can tell, it's from about 2016. Looks very good. There's no sounds. I'm not sure they were actually intended to be a part of the project. This was more of an experiment than an attempt to truly replicate Space Invaders. It was just an experiment to see if it could be done. Other than that, it's actually pretty impressive. Looks damn good. with that, I think I'm done. I wish I could say this was a comprehensive view of all Space Invaders ports and clones. It's not. There are simply too many to choose from, particularly when it comes to the older computer systems. There's clones for the Commodore Amiga, which is the Super Space Invaders Domark port that we've already looked at. There's ports for Java, Android, iOS that we didn't even touch upon. Throw on top of that the number of variants of the game, including Space Invaders Get Even for the Wii, Space Invaders Extreme for the PSP, DS, Xbox Live, Steam, Space Invaders Extreme 2, Space Invaders Infinity. That's just the tip of the iceberg. I probably could have done at least another 45 variants if I really wanted to. To be honest with you, I'm tired of playing Space Invaders. It's time to move on to something else. Our next episode will feature a viewer request. We're going to take a look at Mario Brothers. Hopefully, doesn't take me 3 or 4 weeks to complete. I've actually been working on finishing my basement. I'm turning it into the ultimate man cave where my arcade games will be and my console games, and that's been chewing up a lot of my time. I'm actually mudding and taping drywall right now, so that's kind of why I've been delayed a little bit. I'm trying to focus on that, get it done, hopefully before the holidays. Anyway, hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching. Until next time, happy gaming. Peace.